Well, first of all, I would never tell people to stop being critical. I mean, one of the most fundamental principles of American democracy is to hold people who have been elected to higher office accountable for what they do in our name. So there's no such thing as a free pass. If you don't think I wake up every morning, if people think I wake up and go, oh, Donald Trump's president, I'm so relieved. I'm not going to do any studying. I'm just going to accept everything at face value and just, oh, dear God, thank you, Lord Jesus, little baby Jesus, for bringing me Donald Trump, who's saving me from the world. That's not how I operate, guys. I've never operated that way. I wake up every morning and I start digging into the facts. I parse out every statement made. I look for supporting documentation. I look for, countervailing opinions from around the world. I spend hours doing this every single day because my job as an American citizen is to hold him accountable for what he says he's going to do. So I don't take anything at face value. I make him prove it. I make him and his administration prove it. Again, let's just get to basics here. When people start comparing Trump and what he's doing to previous administrations, you leave out the one thing I just told you about, the revolution. You see, you can't pretend that there's continuity between what happened with the reset of the Obama administration and what Trump's doing. Why? Because there's a revolution taking place. You see, that reset wasn't a reset because the deep state has never wanted neutrality or stability or peace. The deep state has always wanted to bring Russia down. Let's talk about the reset for a minute. You know who the genius was who came up with the reset? His name is Michael McFaul. At the time, Michael McFaul was the Russia desk guy at the National Security Council. He was brought in out of Stanford by Obama to be his Russia guy. Michael McFaul is not a Russian expert. He's a guy who spent some time in Russia, but see, a Russian expert, somebody who appreciates Russian culture, Russian history, the Russian people, the Russian nation, can have empathy with the Russians. Michael McFaul was a Russian exploiter. Michael McFaul came in to his adulthood at a time when the Soviet Union had collapsed, and he was in working with the National Endowment for Democracy and all these other wonderful regime change operations to empower Boris Yeltsin. Michael McFaul is one of the people that created the policies that the Charge d'Affaires Mary wrote about in his 1994 long telegram, the second long telegram, where he said, what we're doing isn't promoting democracy. We're actually destroying democracy and the potential democracy in Russia for our short-term economic and political objectives. We're empowering a dictator. Boris Yeltsin is a dictator. He said that back then. Michael McFaul was a huge supporter of Boris Yeltsin, keeping him propped up. He's one of the guys that helped get Boris Yeltsin reelected in 1996 in the election that we bought and we bragged about buying. So Michael McFaul's that guy. Now, he came in with the reset, not because he wanted to reset relations with Russia, because he wanted to empower Dmitry Medvedev, who had just swapped positions with Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin has done his 2 terms, which he's permitted to do by the Constitution, couldn't do a 3rd term. So Dmitry Medvedev was the prime minister, and they agreed on a swap. Medvedev became the president, and Putin became the prime minister for that 1 term, and then they were going to flip back. McFaul said, we don't want Putin back in. Do you see what's happening here? It's not about being friends with Russia. It's about manipulating domestic Russian politics to keep Putin out of power. So the reset was all about bribing Russia and bribing Medvedev to keep Putin away. It got so bad that Obama's vice president, Biden, flew to Moscow in the March 2011 before the and lectured the Russians. He went and met with the political opposition that the CIA was funding, NED was empowering, USAID. See, back then when you said that, but they're just doing good things, Scott. The Russians said, no, they're not. They're doing regime change. That's why we kicked them out in 2012. Well, today we all know they were doing regime change because Donald Trump and Doge, who everybody mocks, went in and ripped the cover off, and we know now that USAID was a regime change operation. The National Endowment for Democracy wasn't doing democracy, it was doing regime change. That the entire thing we called American diplomacy was about regime change, and the Russian reset was about regime change, keeping Vladimir Putin out of office. That was it. It wasn't diplomacy, it wasn't a change of heart. It's what America always did. We don't. When it comes to Russia, we had one policy and one policy only: the strategic defeat of Russia. And we disguised it with a whole bunch of other stuff. But at the end of the day, it was just that. We now have a president who says, no, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not out for the strategic defeat of Russia. I'm out for genuine, peaceful coexistence. This is the real Russian reset that's taking place right now. The real Russian reset. And that's why you can never bring up the past when talking about what's happening today, because there is a firewall now that's been built. It's called the Trump Revolution. He is destroying the deep state that made all that possible. USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, the State Department, it's all been destroyed. It doesn't exist anymore. It's not out there doing bad things. The CIA is paralyzed right now with people running away because he's not playing that game. So we can't talk about the past and compare it to Donald Trump. When you talk about what Trump's doing today, you have to start from scratch. I'm not saying it's perfect. People should be looking at it and judging it critically, but you can't sit there and go, well, you know, the last time we did this, when we tried to do the old Budapest thing with the neutrality, why are you bringing that up? That system no longer exists. Well, you know, Obama tried the Russian reset. Who cares? That system's dead. This is all brand new. And you have to only assess it from what it is today, because there is no linkage between what's happening today and what happened in the past.
What Trump has done to institutions like USAID has certainly sent them into a tailspin. It has made a real material difference. The deep state is dead, and the United States is everywhere in terms of its regime change apparatus. What do you say to people who believe that there could be simply a reorientation of foreign policy away from what was an unsuccessful? And I think this is where, for me, one of the big reasons I see Trump doing a lot of this is because the war has been lost in Ukraine, and there's no way of getting that back. There's no way to change that calculus. But there might be a way of shifting U.S. foreign policy goals, not necessarily in the interest of peace, but toward different avenues.
Well, let's talk Venezuela for a second. I mean, it's curious. The Biden administration made a. Let's see if we can establish some fundamental points of agreement. That the Biden administration, when they came in, inherited a policy from the Trump administration that incorporated elements of regime change. Can we agree on that? That there were several CIA-backed coups that failed, that the Biden administration was continuing down that policy. Can we agree on this? So we're dealing with the deep state in regime change. And now when we speak of regime change in Venezuela, we're talking about old CIA connectivity with the old families of Venezuela. Guaido came from all that and all that. So we've got that going. Jim Story, you know who Jim Story is, the American diplomat who was, the last guy running the embassy in Venezuela, went to Colombia and set up the Venezuela interest section, which is nothing more than a regime change front for USAID, NED, and the CIA to come in and all that. That's operating full time there. We were sanctioning the hell out of the Venezuelans as well. Their oil. We were trying to shut down their oil economy because we wanted Maduro gone. And then the Biden administration shifts gears. Why? Why suddenly did the Biden administration give oil concessions to Venezuela?
Was it the price of oil?
It was about the economy. It was about oil. It was about the sanctioning of Russia. The fact that I believe some of our refineries on the Gulf Coast are geared towards the sulfuric content of oil that comes out of Venezuela, because Venezuela was one of the largest producers of oil, supplying American gasoline production and diesel production. And when we cut off Venezuela, then we had to go. There was one place in the world that had oil of similar sulfuric content, and that was in the Urals of Russia, but we couldn't buy from Russia, so we had them sell that oil to India, and then India tapped it a little bit, and then we transferred on the ships and we brought it in. That got to be very expensive and a little bit hypocritical when we're talking about opposing the war in Russia. And so the Biden administration said we're going to give concessions, and then we had an election, where Maduro won, but what we did is we said, if we start playing games. I mean, we don't have to get it deep, but do you agree with me that we suddenly had a sort of a weird change in our posture towards Venezuela, one where we gave concessions and we didn't necessarily reject Maduro as the leader? Guaido was sort of pushed to the side and forgotten. Can we agree on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a policy I've seen Democrats do many times in the past. For example, there was the temporary thaw with Cuba, and that ended up actually being just a very cookie cutter, paper thin, a very reversible act, which we saw then Trump reverse very quickly when he ended up. But anyway, continue.
But we can agree that it wasn't Trump's policy, right? It was a Biden policy. Right. So Trump comes in, looks at it and says, what the hell is this? We gave him concessions for what? What did we get out of it? What's going on here? See, Trump is saying we're going to be buying Russian oil straight from the spigot pretty soon. We don't need Venezuela. We don't need to play games. So see, Trump's project, and I'm not saying Trump's right, because we know what Trump did before, CIA coups and all that kind of stuff. But Trump came in, took a look at Venezuela policy and said, we got no leverage over them anymore. I mean, if we want fundamental change, we've got no leverage. If we want to create change, and it's not just about change with Venezuela, Trump is thinking strategically in South America on how to position America to be the dominant political and economic power in South America to push back against the Chinese. I think we can agree on that too, that Trump wants to push it back against the Chinese. That's his strategic vision, the American fortress that he's talked about. And so in order to do that, we need to have some leverage over the Venezuela. And so he shut down the concessions. And they said, no, we're not doing that. And, we need Maduro to make some changes in terms of, how things happen. Now, that's the opening gambit for a longer negotiation. But that's what I think is driving this. I don't think it's, it's not, the deep state doing it. Jim Story's not in Colombia anymore. They're not running that, regime change thing. That's all been shut down. The USAID has no money. NED's not there anymore. All shut down. It's all shut down. All Trump did is say, we're not playing stupid games. What Biden did was a stupid game, inconsistent. What do we want to accomplish in Venezuela? What's our strategic objectives? And can we achieve that there is a tongue twister there, that strategic objective through this concession thing? So he just shut it down. That's what I think is going on here. I don't think there's anything deeper than that. I don't think there's a cabal of Venezuelan deep staters who have magically avoided being decapitated in the purge that's taken place, who are sitting there going to Trump, okay, now we need you to do this, we need you to do that. I think Trump took a look at it and went, this is stupid. Why did we give them concessions, and what are we getting for that concession? See, he's a zero-sum game guy. He said, we gave away something, we didn't get anything back in return. So we're taking that away until we get something. If you want those concessions, you got to put something on the table for us. And I think that's the direction Trump's heading. I don't think there's any nefarious deep state thing taking place here.
One concern that I have, that I feel the audience has as well, because we've seen this with other iterations of U.S. presidential administrations, the move toward changing U.S. foreign policy, framing it as, let's say, peace or like a game changer or what have you, and actually it becoming more effective. So right now, this zero sum that Trump is promoting with Venezuela, on the one hand, could be seen as, well, the United States wants something out of any kind of policy with Venezuela. On the other, there's still, not only with Venezuela, but also with Russia, there's still all in any U.S. foreign policy flashpoint, there's still these ongoing policies, sanctions on Venezuela, Donald Trump just renewed sanctions on Russia for a year, albeit we have negotiations ongoing. So what do you say to this about the fear of, because I think there is a fear of this, that the United States' foreign policy as an imperial policy becomes more effective under Trump rather than pursuing peace in the medium and long term?
But again, I go back to the basics. Look, Donald Trump has admitted that when he came in his first term, he had no idea how to govern. And so what happened is he had to turn to, the establishment to assist him. That's why you got the John Boltons and you got the Mike Pompeos and people to come in, people who despised Donald Trump. And yet they worked for him, supposedly loyal lieutenants, because he had no one else to turn to. He needed to govern. He didn't understand what was happening. So he was taken hostage by the deep state. And the deep state, when he tried something radical, such as the denuclearization of North Korea, he ended up getting stabbed in the back by his national security advisor and by his secretary of state. When he was looking at policies, he wanted fundamental change with Russia, and the deep state prevented that. The next thing you know, he's sanctioning Russia, selling weapons to Ukraine, doing all this crazy stuff because he's not in control of the foreign policy. The deep state was. And then he left, and he's learning all this, and then he has the deep state for the next 4 years carrying out lawfare against him, tried to destroy him, remove him from power. And what Donald Trump did is retreat back in to a group of trusted loyalists and said, if I'm going to be president again, I cannot have any deep state involvement. We're going to have to go to war with them. It's not just about not bringing them in. We have to fundamentally destroy them and destroy the apparatus that we can't trust, the apparatus that has actively conspired against him. And that's what he's done. So I don't think there's any relationship between what he's doing today and what he did when he was president earlier, because back then he was literally held hostage by the deep state. And today he's killing the deep state. He's liberating himself from the deep state. And so then we have to look at what motivates him, because it's impossible to say what motivated him, with Venezuela and others, because again, it wasn't him. It was the deep state that was continuing to push, standard political doctrine and dogma on him regarding Venezuela and Maduro and, how to bring Venezuelan oil production under American control and all this kind of stuff. Now, I think he has a much more simplistic, notion of what makes America great again. And when it comes to Central and South America, the number one thing is that you have to get America in and keep China out. And that's what's driving him, for better or for worse. I'm not saying this is sound policy. I'm not saying it's good for the Venezuelans. I'm not saying anything other than that appears to be what he's doing. He's trying to get Venezuela in the America camp and keep the Chinese out. And that's a complete departure from the past practice. This is a much more simple, pragmatic approach to foreign policy. Will it work? I have no clue. But I would caution people relying too much on analytical models that compare and contrast past performance under previous administrations with Trump's doing today and trying to make some sort of connectivity.